There are an estimated 1,000 to 2,000 children in this country that every year die as a result of parental abuse or neglect, of being maltreated in their own homes. How much of that is attributable to physical abuse? We don't have very clear statistics. But I know just anecdotally from the stories that come across my desk from the newspapers of this country, how many incidents involving the deaths of children started out as a parent or someone in the child's home, some adult in the child's home, disciplining that child, and that discipline getting out of control and leading to the death of that child. Whether it's physical striking, whether it's a burn-related situation, a shaking-related situation, whether it's the biological parent, the biological parent's boyfriend, a stepfather, a babysitter. Too many cases in this country of children dying are attributable to corporal punishment that got out of control. Too much of this physical assaulting of children is resulting in serious injury and death of children. Unless we face that, we are just going to constantly continue to see these horrible stories in the news of children who have been tragic victims of violence in their home.
Well, getting back to violence by parents against children, it's very extensive. If you take the low level of violence that we don't even call violence or think of as violence, what's called spanking or corporal punishment, then it's almost every child. Study after study, starting with our, well, even before that. The first study I found data on this in the 1950s found that 99% of that sample had experienced corporal punishment by their parents. And when I studied it with a nationally representative sample in 1975 and 1985 and then 1995, it's still in the 90 to 95% range. So almost all American children are brought up violently in the sense of being hit by their parents at some time or other. Of course, it varies a lot. Some kids are hit, there's almost none who are never hit, but some kids are hit very, very rarely. Some are hit several times a day, and the typical pattern of parents who do it with toddlers is about 3 times a week. Well, is child abuse the biggest problem? If by child abuse you mean children seriously assaulted and injured or even killed by their parents, that is, of course, a very serious problem. There's over 1 million children, probably somewhere around 1 million to 1.5 million children minimum, seriously assaulted, not just spanked or hit with paddles and hairbrushes, but seriously assaulted by their parents every year. And 3 to 5 children are killed by their parents every day, day in and day out. So you can see it's a pretty serious problem.
I think the question about how extensive family violence is has become a very tricky question, as advocacy groups have attempted to carve out a place on the public agenda for their particular form. So you hear words like epidemic and dramatic increase and horrible tragedies, and somehow that causes some difficulty in terms of the scientific study of family violence, because it really does distort how much there is. So there's 2 answers to the question. There's a lot more family violence than anyone ever expected to find, a lot more than anybody wants to accept, but it certainly is not a majority form in families, with the exception of siblings and corporal punishment of kids. I mean, quite frankly, It's hard to find families that legitimately and validly can report, no, we've never spanked, we've never touched, we've never slapped our children. That's almost universal. You can't minimize how much family violence there is. You ought not to minimize it because although it's not the majority, I mean, there are 3–4% of American women are going to be abused by their partners this year. Now, that means 96% are not. But 4% is a staggeringly large number when you consider that that's 4 per 100 and the crime rate is measured per 100,000. So the real issue in family violence is not the bean counting of how many victims are there, but the fact that intimate relationships are much more violent than almost any other relationship that a human being will be involved in a Western society. You just simply don't run the risk of being a victim of violence in the streets, in Central Park, at work, anywhere that you run in a family. And the risk in the family for women is 1 in 22. The risk of abusive violence for kids is about 1 in 22. And then the risk for more mundane and yet harmful forms of violence like slapping, pushing, or shoving gets you up into the, at least for women, gets you to 10 or 20% of women in a year. And for children, probably at some point in their life, every child has been hit by a caretaker. In terms of children, clearly at some point in their lives, a child is going to get hit. The shape or risk for kids being hit by their parents or caretakers takes the form of an upside-down U, so that the youngest children, newborns up to a year of age, are not hit as often. And then when kids turn 15, 16, 17, and 18, the risk goes down. Quite frankly, the risk goes down because they are not as available.
One of the myths about corporal punishment is that only people of low income or low educational status are hitting their kids. And in fact, this just isn't true. In fact, most physical punishment is being carried out by middle-class parents. There is a decline with higher socioeconomic level past middle class. But in fact, in Graziano's study of intact families, two-parent middle-class families, corporal punishment was being used in 25% weekly, and a third of the time an object was being used during that disciplinary encounter, which in most places would be considered abusive. So this is not just a low-income family problem. It's not a single-parent family problem. It definitely can happen to anyone, and that makes sense from what I've said before, which is that people tend to discipline the way they were disciplined. Doesn't matter what your status is now. Obviously, people are more likely to lose it when they're under multiple stresses, but that may also describe the middle class in many cases now.